Welcome to week five. This is Government 2306. So today, this week, we are going to look at public policy, and then we're going to look at two public policy issues that we have here in the state of Texas, uh, public education and healthcare. So let's start with public policy. All right. So, what is public policy? Public policy is simply the response or lack of response of government decision makers to an issue. All right. So, these are the stages of the policy making process. Okay. Agenda building. So, what is the agenda building? It's a process through which issues become matters of public concerns and government action. This is the part of the process where we identify problems for government action. It also defines the nature of those problems, right? So an example would be, right, the rising cost of higher education, rising cost of college, right? We have identified that as an issue. So now we start thinking about what are some ways that we can solve that issue. What are some problems that can come up in trying to solve that issue? The next stage is the policy formulation. It's the development of strategies for dealing with the problem. So here we start looking at what are some strategies that we can use to deal with the issue, right? So you have so there's two models here. The rational comprehensive model, policymakers establish goals, identify policy alternatives, estimate the costs and benefits of the alternatives, and then select the policy that produces the greatest benefit. So back to our example on the rising cost of college, right? Rising cost of higher education, right? So policymakers, people in government, nonprofit organizations, right? Citizens, right? They come up with ideas, goals, so we can, maybe make 2 year colleges, community colleges free, right? Or maybe we can do all four. Maybe we can do trade school. We start looking at the cost, right? What are some alternatives? Well, maybe we can allow high school students to take more dual credit, right? Which can allow for the higher cost of education to come down because now those students won't be spending so much money in college because they already have some credit that they took in high school, right? And then we select the best policy, right? That creates the best benefits, right? The next model, the incremental model, policymakers continually adjust policies and the pursuit of policy goals. So it would be basically trial and error. So let's say that we do allow for college more dual credit classes at the high school level, right? But we still see that the rising cost of college is still expensive, right? It's still high. So then we start changing it up. We start deviating. We start maybe it's tuition. Maybe we can give some type of discount. Maybe we can books, right? Maybe we can make some books free, stuff of that, right? So here they're adjusting the policies in pursuit of the policy goal, right? The policy goal would be to try to get college affordable. So you start adjusting the policy, right? Maybe certain classes become free. Maybe you get cheaper classes if you take them at night or on the weekends, stuff of that, right? But the end goal is to make college affordable, bringing down the cost. During this model, the policymakers are, they're adjusting policies. They're continuously adjusting the policies. Okay. And then we get the policy adoption, right? Policymakers formally adopt a policy solution, right? And then, right, like the state says, right, we're going to make community college free, right? And then the implementation, right? The government agencies begin making the policy work. So that would make that the state would have to step in and fund, right? Spend more money in higher education to bring the cost down, and then you get the policy evaluation, the assessment of the policy, right? We see if it's working. If it's not, right, we recommend revisions, right? So, I mean, the big idea, the main point that I want to get from this is that, right, these are the stages, right? But as you can see here in the diagram, right, um, you know, they can go back to the policy format. Like if you're at the policy evaluation, it could go back to the policy formulation. It can go back to when they're revising it, they can go to the policy implementation. So it's not a perfect, step by step, right? Some of these steps overlap, right? All right. So, last week, we were talking about local government, right? Um, and in the book, I asked you to read about preemption, right? And now we're gonna go to get you prepared on what preemption is. So, and I feel like this topic is a little bit better here in the public policy unit. So preemption, right? So recent legislative sessions have expanded state efforts to curtail the autonomy granted to home rule cities to bring city activities in line with state mandates, right? So we started to see in the past couple of years how local cities have implemented their own policies, right, to solve some of the issues that they've had, right? But the state saying, no, you can't do that, right, because it goes against our state constitution, right, or it goes against our authority, right? So remember, authority is granted by the state constitution, right? At the end of the day, Austin, right, the state, right, the state legislature, right, not the city of Austin, but Austin as in, the state legislature, they have control over these cities, right? Cities argue that one size fits all response can be problematic, right? We are a huge state, right? Cities like Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, right? They're saying, hey, maybe we should have the freedom to pursue our own policies, right? Because again, right, we have different issues than the ones that the whole state, right? So here are some examples that we've had, right, of cities taking ownership and cities trying to create their own policies, right? So in the city of Laredo, they banned plastic shopping bags, right? And grocery stores, right? No more plastic shopping bags, right? Because they were having a huge issue with people, not disposing of the shopping bags properly and stuff. So the state said no. It went up to the Texas Supreme Court. The Texas Supreme Court ruled that state law preempted local bans. So in other words, Laredo, you cannot have an ordinance banning plastic shopping bags. So Laredo was not allowed to continue their policy of banning shopping bags, right? Here in Harris County, during COVID, during the 2020 presidential election, right? We allowed for drive-through and 24-hour voting, right? Meaning, this is during early voting, right? Meaning that, right, during the early voting period, the last couple of weeks of October, we here in Harris County, right, the county allowed for drive-through and 24-hour voting. In other words, what does that mean? It means that, you could go to these polling stations and vote from your car 24/7, right? And again, this is during COVID, right? People didn't feel safe. This is when, the distance and stuff like that. You were supposed to keep distance from each other because we were trying to stop the spread of the COVID. The legislature passed SB 1 the following year, 2021, which banned drive-through and 24-hour voting statewide. So, in other words, the state said no, right? We're stopping this. So they ban. We have a law now that no county here in Texas can allow drive-through and 24-hour voting. Right. Austin, the city of Austin, passed an ordinance require water breaks for construction workers. Right. Pretty self-explanatory, right? In the summer, it's hot. these workers are working, excuse me, out in the heat, right? So the city of Austin said, hey, these companies need to provide water breaks for their employees, right? Uh, uh, and then the state passed House Bill HB 2127, which is it's the nickname is called the Death Star Law, which eliminated local labor rule. Right. So in other words, cities are not allowed to create their own labor regulations, their own labor ordinance, right? That has to specifically come from the state legislature, right? And not just labor, but other criteria fell under the Death Star law, and it just this law just gave more power to the state legislature, right? So in any city or county who is trying to create a policy, the law gives the state, right, even more power to stop that law or ordinance that goes against the state legislature. Uh, I know there's one another example. Corpus Christi just passed an ordinance banning data centers, right? Because they're going through a water shortage right now because of they've been through they're going through a drought, and now these data centers they require huge amounts of water to cool down the processors and stuff of that. So now the city passed an ordinance saying that there cannot be no data centers in city on city limits, right? So now, how's the state going to respond to that? Wait and see. But they're basically are, if the state allows this, then you're gonna see other cities around Texas who are also going to ban these data centers, right? It's wait and see. We got to see what the state legislature says, but that's something to keep an eye on. Okay. And again, House Bill 2127, state law makes it harder for cities to pass local ordinance that are stricter, excuse me, than state law. Okay. So now we're going to look at education here in Texas, right? This is one of the topics that we're going to talk about today. Education, and the other one towards the end of the slide presentation is on healthcare. So we're going to look at K through 12 education. So federalism and education, right? Remember, um, still education is still largely funded and controlled by state and local governments, right? The federal government is involved in education funding, right? The spending clause, if states want money for educational programs, they have to abide by federal regulations, right? What are those federal regulations? Standardized testing in reading, math, and science, right? So, right, the feds, right, will give the states money, but that money comes with strings attached, right? And what are the strings, right? Uh, you have to administer these standardized tests so we can see where the students of that state are and when it comes to reading, math, and science, right? All right. So looking here at Texas, right? So currently Texas has about 5.5 million students, a majority of them Hispanic, majority economically disadvantaged, right? Around 60% of Texas students are economically disadvantaged. What does that mean? Free or reduced lunch, right? Around 20 have limited English language proficiency, right? ESL, uh, English as a second language, right? Students are becoming more and more costly to educate, right? There's a threat of becoming a low skill state or at least a highly unequal one, right? As you can see here, this is the enrollment summary of Texas public schools, right? For the 2024-2025 school year and the 2025-2026 school year, this past school year. Right? It's broken down by race, economic status, right? Female, gender, male, grade, uh, at risk, homelessness, migrant, and then the different regions, and then we have also here at the bottom charter school enrollment, right? So, governing public schools, right? The Texas Education Agency, right? That's the agency that administers, that governs the public schools here in the state of Texas, right? Administrative agency in charge of executing the state legislature education policy. So, the state passes a law on education. It's up to the TA to execute, right? To implement that law, right? It's headed by an appointed commissioner, right? Our current commissioner is Mike Morath, right? He was appointed by the governor. Remember, this is one of the powers of the governor, right? TA manages the distribution of state and federal funds to public schools, right? And administers the statewide assessment program and accountability system, right? The testing and accountability where we grade the schools, which we'll talk about in a bit. And then we have the State Board of Education, the SBOE, right? It's a 15-member board. You see their pictures there, right? Elected from districts and partisan contests for 4 terms, right? So these people, when you vote for them, they either have a R Republican next to their name or a D Democrat next to their name, right? And these are the districts, right? Where the board is uh voted from, right? So you can see here Harris County, right? Depending where you live in Harris County, right? You notice that District 8 is a split, right? The east part of Harris County and the west part of Harris County. And then you have District 4, which is right like the east part of Houston, the northeast and southeast, and then you have District 6, which runs into the rest of Houston, right? The northwest center, right? Okay. All right. So what are the responsibilities of the SBOE, right? So the legislature says what subjects must be in the curriculum, right? And the SBOE provides the guidelines and standards that must be met, like the TEKS, right? So the legislature says we want our high school students to take these courses, right? At course X, Y, and Z. The SBOE provides the guidelines and the standards. So for this course, right, the students need to know all of these things, right? That's what the teachers would call them, the things that they have to teach to their students. It approves textbooks, right? Uh, so what textbooks the state can use that the county can that the independent school districts can use, right? It doesn't force them to use those books. It just approves, hey, these are a list of books that, that textbooks that, that the districts can use. It approves open educational resources to help students. I mean, like the one that's right now is Blue Bonnet, right? That uses Christian theology and mixes it up with curriculum, right? And that's the big push right now. Some parents, people are upset that we're no longer abiding by the separation of church and state. The state is now implementing Christian teachings into the curriculum. And then the final approval on new charter school application. So if a new charter school is being developed, they get the final say if the charter school can proceed, and it plays a role in directing the investment held by the permanent school fund, right? So what is the permanent school fund? It's state investment and it's a state investment fund for public education. Okay, so they play a role in that. All right. So now we're looking at the school districts, right? Here in the state, there's about, oh, it's the numbers right there. There's 1,202 school districts in the state of Texas, right? They're elected locally, typically 5 to 9 members, right? The school districts have members, five to nine, usually elected by place, but can be at large, right? This sets the budget and school district tax rate. District board elections are very important because they create the budget for the school district and the tax rate for that area, which we'll talk about in a bit. They can issue bonds, right? Especially when they need help improving campuses, maybe even paying more teachers. They can issue a bond where the people have to vote on that bond. They hire the superintendent, right, of the district and oversees them. So if the superintendent is not doing a good job, the board can um, get rid of him or her. Decides on instructional material and curriculum, right? Again, within the limits set by the state legislature and the SBOE. So, right, a district cannot say, hey, we're going in our school district, we're going to be the school districts that teaches a special curriculum. No, they can't do that. Remember, it has to be approved by the state legislature and the Board of Education, right? The State Board of Education. Okay. So as you can see here, these are the Houston Metro School Districts. You can see we have a lot here in the city, Harris County, right? And some of them bleed. I believe some of them might even bleed into the surrounding counties, right? The biggest one, of course, would be Houston HISD, Houston ISD. All right. Again, here are the school districts all over the state and the regions here, the Harris County region. This is region 4. And you can see you can zoom in here and look at the different school districts. Okay. All right. So democracy and public schools. So with the State Board of Education and the school districts, right? They add to our impressive burden as Texan voters, right? So remember we talked about earlier how the members of the State Board of Education have to be elected, right? They take place during the November general election, right? So this coming election in November, right? If you're registered to vote, if your parents are registered to vote, right? Down in the ballot, they're going to see, depending on the district that they live in, right? They're going to see a person running for the State Board of Education, right? Uh, and usually, right, the State Board of Education member from the same party who carry the vote for the governor or president in that election usually wins, right? Because again, right, people when they go to vote, they're not really thinking about, oh, I want to vote for this person when it comes to the State Board of Education, right? They're usually there to vote for, right, the governor, the presidential election, or in this instance, are the Senate seat. Okay. So some people leave it blank. Some people just go with the name recognition. We talked about this earlier. When it comes to judges, you have something similar here. Some people just go by the name. Oh, this sounds like a good name. I'm gonna vote for this person. Or some people vote for that person based on their political party, right? R for Republican, D for Democrat. For the school districts are different. Many school district they hold their elections in May. Not a lot of people vote in these, right? And it's often in odd number years. So here in these district elections, you have low voter turnout, right? And it creates an elevated role for special interests. So here you see special interests definitely playing a huge part because they know that these elections are low voter turnout, so they can target specific people. They have the data, the analytics to tell these people that are running for school board, hey, we know that these people from this area vote. Let's get them out to vote, and you're gonna win, right? or we can provide financial assistance to your campaign, and you're guaranteed to win because again, right, not a lot of people participate in these elections when it comes to voting. Okay. All right. So now we're gonna look at funding. Funding. So remember, we talked about this last week. Education funding, three sources of funding, right? All right. Local funding, property tax, state, and federal, right? Federal is around 10% of the funds. So what problems come with a system that is heavily reliant on local property taxes, right? Inequality between property rich and property poor school districts, right? Property poor districts will not be able to raise the same amount of revenue with the same tax rate. Okay. So if you're a school district that, it's a poor property school district, you're not going to be able to raise the same amount of money that if you're located, if you're in an area where the property values are high, right? Um, that school district it is going to be able to generate a lot of money, uh, right? So that comes with a problem. We have inequality, right? So we run into conflicts, right, over education funding. Texas' current and highly complicated system of school finance came about after a series of court cases, right? The Edgewood Independent School District versus Kirby, right? I believe there's four court cases around around this issue here. But the main thing is that it ruled that reliance on local property taxes violated the state constitution, right? Article 1, Section 7 of the state constitution states that a general diffusion of knowledge being essential to the preservation of the liberties and rights of the people, it shall be the duty of the legislature of the state to establish and make suitable provisions for the support and maintenance of an efficient system of public free schools, right? So, in other words, right, our constitution states that we have to provide public free education, right? Uh, we the state needs to figure out a way to help these poor school districts, right? That don't have the property taxes to raise enough money to help their students, right? So the ruling led to years of back and forth between the legislature and the court, right? And eventually the legislature was able to establish the system that we have today. So what is the system that we have today, right? The, it's called the Foundation School Program, FSP. Uh, so Tier 1 maintenance and operation funding, the state sets an amount per student that each school must have based on its students' characteristics. That's the basic allotment, right? It is set at the state legislature sets this. It is at 6,215 plus X and Y and Z equals a district's foundation entitlement. Okay. School districts required to tax at a specific rate, and that is the maximum compressed tax rate, the MCR. The MCR is currently between 56.28 cents to 62.54 cents out of every 100 worth of property after last year's big property tax cut, right? The school districts that raise more than their foundational entitlement taxing at the MCR are required to send their extra revenue to the state. Okay. So what does that mean? So these rich property districts who are raising more that their foundation entitlement, right, have to send that extra money to the state, right? They don't keep that money, right? The extra money once they reach their cap, right, that they generate from the MCR, right? Then they have to send that money, right? They have to send that money to the state. And the MCR is the tax that the district is putting on a property, right? Okay, so you have a rich school, right, who is collecting property taxes, right, and that the MCR, right, and once it reaches its foundational entitlement, right, again, it's very complicated, but I don't want to get into very deep because I don't want to get you guys confused, but just think of it like this: once a school district reaches its cap, its foundation entitlement, it has to send that money, its extra money, to the state, right? So, right there, the state is gonna send it to the district, the other districts that don't achieve their foundational entitlement on their own, right? So these poor districts, right, that are collecting property taxes but are not able to get to their foundational entitlement, right? They're gonna get that money from the state to reach it, right? This is called recapture. Recapture is necessary, otherwise property wealthy districts would be able to raise a vast amount of revenue per student with the same MCR, creating unacceptable levels of inequality. So if we don't have this recapture system, then you're going to have school districts that are going to be able to raise a huge amount of money, and they're going to be able to use that money for books, for new buildings, right, for teacher pay, and then you're going to have these poor school districts who are not able going to be able to raise that money, right, and they're going to be these school districts, are going to be low funded, right? They're not gonna have the top tier school buildings. Teacher pay is not gonna be it's not gonna be up there with the highly rich district, right? Materials, right? So we don't want that. We do not want inequality in education, right? So this is called Robin Hood, right? Another name for recapture is called Robin Hood, right? So Texas has established a relatively small difference between school districts in terms of funding. Robin Hood policy has been very successful, but it's also very controversial, right? Some areas are paying huge amount of their local property tax revenue to the state rather than their own students, right? These rich property districts, right? That money that they're collecting does not go to their students. It's actually going to the state, right? And the state then the state is using that money to distribute to these poor districts. Okay. In 1993, when recapture first came into effect, there was just 34 districts subject to it, right? It was mostly the wealthy suburbs, right? You're right, because that's where the wealthy suburbs. That's where the properties were high, right? But rising property values, there are now 200 districts subject to recapture, right? So you have 200 districts in the state who are exceeding, right? They're generating more money, and they have to send that money to the state, right? Uh, and then you have the example of Loyola ISD, which used its extra money that it was getting, right? So, when I wouldn't say extra money, but the money that it was given, because La Yoyo is a poor district, right? So they were getting money from the state, from this recapture Robin Hood policy. So they used that money that they were getting from the state to create a $20 million water park. And then the criticism is, how does this water park help their students? Right? This is not going to education. This is going to for looks like leisure. Okay. Okay. So, is there pure equality between districts now? No, because that would be unconstitutional, right? If school districts could only charge the same tax rate, the MCR, right, and had no discretion, this would basically be a statewide property tax, and that's prohibited by the Texas state constitution. That's why school districts, right, right, in the previous slide, in the previous two slides, it showed you where the MCR is, right, from 56 to 60, I believe, right? So the school districts can put that tax for anywhere between those numbers, right? You also have HB House Bill 3 in 2019. It added to more inequality, right? It lowers school districts' maintenance and operations property tax rate, meaning that school districts have to bring down property taxes for the maintenance and operations of buildings, reduce how much property wealthy districts had to send back to the state. So now, because of the law that we passed in 2019, um, property wealthy districts are sending less to the state, and school districts are generating less from the property taxes, right? Facilities and funding, districts have a separate interest in sinking INS tax. The tax can have a maximum rate of 50 cents per $100 of valuation used to pay down debt issued for capital improvement, right? So this tax is only used to pay down debt when it comes to new schools, right? Creating a new school because the population of the area is increasing, so you need new schools, new elementary schools, new middle schools, new high schools, a new stadium, right? New facilities or classrooms. We need bigger classrooms. We need actual labs in our classrooms so kids can do science labs and stuff of that nature, right? And this is not subject to recapture. So this tax is not subject to recapture, right? So uh so you can for this tax you can go above and whatever you generate, right? It stays in the school district and you don't have to send this to Austin. All right. So Texas has created a somewhat equitable system of school finance, but it's certainly not a generous one. Per student funding is comparatively low when we look at other states. The basic allotment increased from 6,160 to 6,215. That's an increase of just $55. This passed in the last legislative session. Um, Something that does help the state is that we have a low cost of living here in the state, and there's also right there's a lot of debate over potential teacher shortages. um, and here you can see how different states spend as percentage of their gross state product. This is from 2021. As you can see, Texas ranks 31st in the nation, so we don't spend a lot on our students, right? We're only spending 3.45 percentage of our gross state product, right? Now we're going to look at accountability, grading students, right? So the state of Texas assessment of academic readiness, STAR, you guys are probably familiar with this, needed to meet every student success act. So why does the state administer the STAR test? Well, it's because the federal government, during the last year, I believe, during the last year of the Obama administration, improved the No Child Left Behind with its new law, Every Student Success Act, right? So, again, more federal regulations and education. If states want money, they have to again administer these standardized tests. It includes annual assessments for reading and mathematics, grades three through eight, writing at grades 4 and 7, science at grade 5 and 8, social studies at grade 8, and then end of course, the EOC assessments, all right, in high school, English 1, English 2, algebra, biology, and US history, right? So what does that mean? It just means that at the end of the in high school, if you want to graduate, right, you have to pass these five STAR tests in order to graduate with a high school diploma here in the state. Uh, this upcoming school year is the last year. It's the last year of these five tests. Um, right, of the current version of these tests, right? Because the last legislative session, the state passed a new law. Because it's a new law, they still have to meet the requirements of the Every Student Success Act, but now instead of the high school students taking five STAR tests to graduate, they're only going to need four to graduate, and that's going to start in the 2027-2028 school year. And the STAR test that's getting removed is English 2, because that's one of the more difficult tests. So the 2027-2028 school year, you're gonna see only four star tests, right? And now also it's gonna be broken up, right? Because these tests are usually administered at the end of the school year in April, May. Now they're being broken up into three tests: one at the beginning of the school year, at in the middle of the school year, and at the end of the school year. And according to the state legislature, the law that passed, these tests, these four tests, are only are supposed to be about 30 questions. It's not going to take you the whole day, and you're supposed to get the results back within a couple of days. This upcoming school year, some school districts are participating in pilot programs for these tests. Um, this is gonna be it's gonna be a little bit different in the upcoming school years. And that also applies for the elementary and middle schools, right? The tests are broken down into three. Now you have a beginning, middle, and end, right? All right. So grading schools, right? So Uh, Texas has ranked schools A through F since 2017. So it's primarily, so how does a grade get its score? It's primarily by the scores on the STAR test, right? 70% of the grade comes from either their results or their performance on relative to school with similar economic demographics. 30% of the grade is based on their ability to close gaps between groups, right? Closing the gaps. In other words, make so because the state has all this data on these students. So let's say if a student uh on one of these star tests, especially on the math and the reading writing, right? If they got what is it, approaches one and then their next time that they take it, they get meet, that's closing the gaps. In other words, they're trying to get the students to keep growing, right? Accountability system is very controversial. Teacher unions generally are opposed to this accountability system. Critics say that it promotes a teach to the test mentality, right? So, because right, there's a lot of pressure of these schools to have a high grade. So, how do you get a high grade? You have to make sure that most of your students pass the STAR test. So, teachers are teaching to the test, and I mean, some of you guys might be familiar. Uh, uh, might be familiar with this, right? In your high school experience, you probably had teachers were teaching you the test, right? We got to make sure we do good on the STAR test so you can graduate and stuff. Too much pressure on students and teachers, right? A lot of stress, right? Because not only are you taking these tests, but you're also taking benchmarks so the district can see where you're at. Um, and and high stakes testing, right? They put a lot of pressure on the students, right? And some students, the anxiety that comes with also on teachers, right? If a teacher has students who perform uh, low on the test, that teacher can be reassigned, could, might not get a contract next year. So there's a lot of pressure on students and teachers when it comes to these tests. The critics say that the STAR is not a true measure of student performance, right? Right. It doesn't, it just right. You can get a good score on the STAR test, but does not it's not necessarily going to mean that you are going to be college ready or that you're going to be successful after graduating high school. Um, Low ranking schools, so schools that have bad grades, right? That have bad grades can expect a withdrawal of more socially economically advantaged students to better performing school, furthering segregation. So in other words, right, you if a school is a bad school, meaning that their grade is, let's say, an F, right? Parents are going to be aware of that and they're going to move their child to a different school, to a better school, which means that that school, right, is going to be it's what we call a brain withdrawal, right? You have the good students are being withdrawn, are being moved. from their school by their parents because they don't like the school. The school is an F. The school is bad, right? And they're going to a different school, and that school is the best, and it's gathering all the top tier students, which makes that school even better than the rest, right? You also have the TA takeover. So TA required by state law to take over consistently failing school districts or close to failing campuses. So if a school district has really bad schools for like about 5 years, the state can take over the school district, or if a school is about to fail, they can also step in and take over the school district. If just one of their campuses consistently fails for 5 years, the state can take it over. And when that happens, it overthrows the board that the people elected, and it gets appointed by the commissioner, Mike Morath. It's you're seeing this in minority majority communities where you have so a perfect example would be HISD, where a majority of the students in HISD are Hispanic, right? And low income, and the state is coming in and taking it over. Uh, but proponents of these takeovers are saying that it is a good thing because um, why should students' lives be wasted because the board is not doing anything to try to bring up these test scores, right? So some examples, Houston HISD, Houston Independent School District, right? I believe their takeover is coming to an end in 2027, 2028 school year. Um, they've been the state took them over, I believe, since 2023, I believe. And then the most recent one, the one that's gonna start this school year, is in Fort Worth ISD. There's a link there. Click on the link if you want to read about how the state is taking over, how and why the state is taking over Fort Worth ISD. All right. Now we're gonna get to school choice, okay, which charter schools. They've been permitted here in the state since 1995. They are public school funded entirely by state, no local property taxes. So these charter schools are not funded by the property taxes that they collect. No, they're funded by the state. The state sets money aside for these charter schools. These charter schools must be open enrollment within their assigned area. So they have to allow anybody in that lives in that area that they're working on, that they're operating on, um, subject to the state accountability system. So what does that mean? Is that they're also going to get a grade, right? They have to administer the STAR test. They're not run by the state, right? They're typically nonprofits or they're run by other businesses. They cannot be religious, cannot be religious. Uh, a lot of freedom from state regulations. One of the big ones is that their teachers do not need to be state certified to teach in these schools. Okay. They've grown very rapidly. Around 6% of students are now enrolled in one of these charter schools here in the Houston area. You've probably seen these around, but these are the most popular ones. KIP, Yes Prep, Idea, and Harmony. These are the ones that operate here in Houston. Okay. So, what are the pros and cons of charter schools? Critics say that they take the best from public schools and drain their resources. Again, brain withdrawal, right? If a student sorry, not a student. If a school is low performing, right, and a charter school opens up right across the street from this low performing school, right, parents are going to withdraw their students, their kids, from that low performing school and enroll him or her in in the charter school. Increases the number of ISD experiencing recapture, right? So, um, more districts are experiencing recapture because, right, less students, we have less students, right? But you still have the property, right? And that property is getting taxed, right? And once you meet that limit, you have to send that money to the state. Even though your students are gone, right? You don't have a lot of students, but you still have the property in that district. The property is subject to the MCR tax. And once you reach your limit, right? That extra money needs to go to the state. Some of these charter schools have been forced to close for financial reasons. Some of them have closed for some fraud and stuff. Advocates say that many perform well, right? Uh, it's a disproportionate presence amongst the top-rated schools in the state. So, in other words, some of these charter schools are up there when it comes to the best schools in Texas. They provide a choice that formerly only the wealthy had, right? Because mo wealthy parents, very few wealthy parents send their students to public education, right? They put them in private schools, right? But now you're giving the choice the choice of education, a better education to low income people in the form of charter schools, and allows low income students to escape schools with an F grade, right? So you're giving these people an option, a choice, right? Instead of being stuck in a low performing school or district, they can go to a charter school, right? And get, right? Some would say a better education than in low performing school. All right. More school choice. We have this, we call this the education savings accounts, ESAs, and vouchers. They're somewhat similar. This is public money to fund the education of a parent's choice. ESAs are in fashion now. A lot of states are passing these education savings accounts. ESAs allow parents to spend a variety of in a variety of education services. They can help fund homeschool, micro school. What do we mean by micro school? Like after school tutorials or private school tuition. Arizona was the first state to provide universal ESA in 2002. Other Republican states have since followed. Most private schools are religious. They cannot be excluded from a program accessible to similar secular institutions. So, what does that mean? Is that if a parent chooses to participate in these ESA accounts, they can use that money for private and religious schools. Okay. So ESAs again and so instead of ESA is the ESA accounts, vouchers, what do you want to call them? It's very simple, right? It's the state giving a parent, here's money, use that money to homeschool your son or daughter, your child, or you can use that money to enroll him in a private school or a religious school, right? Instead of paying tuition, you have the money from the state to pay for that, right? That is what vouchers are. Okay. ESA, right? These education savings accounts have been the priority of Governor Abbott for the past couple of years. It failed during the regular two special sessions dedicated to the issue because of because of the Texas House. There's a coalition in the Texas House of Democrats and rural Republicans who were opposed to they were against this and they were able to stop it, right? And one of the reasons why they were opposed of this is because they knew that if the state passed these education savings accounts, these rural school districts were going to be in a sense eliminated because in these rural communities, right, the rural school district provides a lot of the jobs for that community. And if you have a charter school or a private school, well, not a charter school, but a private school set up, right? It's a lot, right? A lot of parents are going to start sending their kids to to these new private schools, and it's just going to end these rural school districts. So that's why these rural Republicans were against the idea of vouchers, right? Uh, Abbott Abbott used his war chest to support the primary challengers, and on the Republican side, he gave them money, campaign contributions, and he got rid of these Republicans who were challenging him on this. He was successful in eliminating many Republicans opponents of school choice. Abbott, the governor, framed school choice policy as education savings accounts, as parental choice and education freedom. Your tax dollars to choose the school that best fits for their child, right? So that was his argument. His argument is you should have the freedom to send your student, your child, to any school that you wish to, and the state is going to help you. So in 2025, Senate Bill 2 passed. It created a statewide education savings account. The legislature provided 1 billion in funding, right? That's a lot of money. Families can apply for state funds to help pay for private school tuition and other approved education expenses. So this, I believe the applications opened up in March of this year, and I think I was reading in the Chronicle last week that families who applied and were granted and were approved for these savings accounts were notified, and they're gonna start getting the money. They're gonna start getting the money this month in July because they can use it for August. They can start enrolling their students, their children into these private schools and pay for private school tuition with the education savings accounts. Okay. All right, now we're going to look at the next policy issue, healthcare. Okay, so here we have this is for the fiscal year. For this fiscal year, it shows you how much money we're spending for each article in our Constitution, right? Agency Article 3, you can see Article 3 that we're spending a lot of money, 39 percent of our budget goes in, it breaks down by public education, higher education, right? And then health and human services is the next one, which we're going to talk about. It's basically healthcare. Okay. All right. So who provides healthcare? Provisions of healthcare, obviously not an enumerated power of the federal government, right? Nowhere in the Constitution does it say that the federal government has the power over healthcare. But the federal government has the money and healthcare is expensive. Federal government free to spend money, right? Right. The state does not have that ability. The state has to budget. So the federal government created Medicare as an amendment to Social Security in 1965. The federal government also helps its own employees through the Veterans Administration, right? Soldiers, uh, right? People in the military. Uh, it's a typo. It should say half of Americans have employer provided insurance, right? So what about others who are under 65 and don't have employer health insurance? We have Medicaid. Medicaid is the federal government program provided money to the states to provide health care for low-income people. Today, it is the largest provider of public insurance with over 90 million people, and the US spends more on healthcare as a percentage of its GDP than any other nation. So we spend about 18% of our GDP on healthcare. That's a lot. All right. So, what is Medicaid? Again, like I said, Medicaid is just one of many public healthcare programs in the US, medical coverage for low-income people. At when it was created back in 1965, it was expected to be a very small program providing medical coverage to people who already receive welfare. So it's basically if you're on welfare, you were going to get Medicaid. Half a century later, it's the single largest item in many states' budget and covers 90 million Americans. And you saw it in the slide in the pie chart, right? Texas spends a lot on healthcare, which is part of the Medicaid. So who is covered under Medicaid? All states entering the program, which they all have, right, must cover the blind, disabled, pregnant women, families of dependent children, and low-income elderly people. right? Today, they must cover these groups up to a specific percentage of the federal poverty level, the FPL. They can go, they can, though, go above to a certain level and still get matching funds. Okay. All right. So these are the poverty guidelines. Mm, these are household family size for except Alaska and Hawaii. Those are separate. But you can see here, right, the poverty guidelines. And this is used to see uh, where families where can families be when they're applying for these benefits. All right. Medicaid. So what is covered in Medicaid? Okay. For the covered individuals, states must provide the following mandatory services under Medicaid. Inpatient hospital care, right? So if you go to the hospital, you have Medicaid, right? Medicaid is going to cover that. Inpatient hospital care, right? Outpatient hospital care. So when you get discharged, anything outside of the hospital right, that is going to help you recover, it's going to be covered under Medicaid. Laboratory and X-ray test, right? Physician services, skilled nursing home services, right? States can go beyond these mandatory services and still receive matching funds, right? So I link there for any optional services also provided under Medicaid. Medicaid funding, it's administered by the states within federal limits, costs shared between federal and government states. So uh, again, part of federalism, right? The states control the program, right? Within the limits set by the federal government, right? What are those limits? Who do they have to allow to be in the program, right? And the cost is shared between the federal and state. So whatever the state spends on Medicaid, right? The federal government is going to match it. Okay. The ratio depended on state per capita income, massive program for both the states and federal government. More than half of all federal government transfers to the state, increasingly dominating state budgets. So again, healthcare is very expensive. We have a lot of people on Medicaid. So the states around the country are budgeting more on this. They're increasing the budget because of this. The federal government currently provides just under 60% of the costs in Texas, right? Federal government will match an unlimited amount of state medical spending. So whatever Texas spends on Medicaid, the federal government will match it. And here you see here how it works, right? All right. Here we see how different states uh the percentage, right? So Texas was at 60, right? Texas at 60. So this is Texas. So how much money we're spending on Medicaid? About 60%. All right. Why so costly? Why is Medicaid so costly? Covers a lot of people and the cost of healthcare is rising rapidly. Up to 90 plus across the US, 10 million, 1966, right? So right now covers about 90% of the people here in the United States. Back in 1966, only 10 million. Most people covered by Medicaid are children, right? But that's not the reason why it's so expensive. Elderly and disabled medical recipients account for around 60% of Medicaid costs, although just 20% of enrollees. Okay, Medicaid, not Medicare, is the largest source of financing for long-term care, nursing homes. That's one of the reasons why Medicaid is so costly to states, right? It's the elderly people. Here we have the percentage of people by type of health insurance coverage and change from 2023 to 2024. Uninsured, All right, the changes, you see it there. Okay. So, states set within limits the eligibility rules, payment levels to providers, and what services will be covered outside of the mandatory services. So, states do have some autonomy when it comes to Medicaid, right? This freedom has led to the program diverging on a whole host of measures. So, in other words, there are 56 different Medicaid programs when counting DC and the territories. So, uh, so if you're eligible for Medicaid benefits here in Texas, and let's say you move to Louisiana, chances are you might not be eligible. Or let's say you were eligible for Medicaid assistance in Mississippi and you move to Texas, there might be a chance that you might not be eligible for Medicaid benefits, right? Because again, different states, they set their limits, their eligibility rules. Okay. There are waivers which allow for even more diversity between states. So a waiver is deviating from the law, right? Allows for state experiments. There are some controversies over this. Work requirements for able-bodied adults during the Trump years, waivers given to a few Republican states to pay for uncompensated care. So some states have tried to add requirements, eligibility requirements, such as you must be able to work to get these benefits, right? Or some care does not like one of the most uh uh, uh, common ones is the chiropractor services, right? Some of those some states do not allow for that to be covered under Medicaid. All right. So here in Texas, this is the Health and Human Services, right? The overview and the commissioner is Stephanie Muth, and you see her there. She's in charge of the Health and Human Services here in the state. All right. So who is covered here in Texas? Texas, of course, covers all must groups, the groups that they have to by the remember these are groups that the federal law says that you have to cover. It does not go much beyond the mandatory minimum. In Texas, able-bodied adults without dependent children are not allowed to enroll in Medicaid, right? Working age adult will only have a chance to get Medicaid in Texas if they are a parent, pregnant, terminally ill, have cervical or breast cancer, or are disabled, or a former foster child. A healthy parent must have pretty low income to qualify in Texas, and these are the guidelines to qualify for Medicaid here in Texas. Children are covered much more generously in the nation and in Texas. Vast majority of the beneficiaries in Texas are children under 19, 69% of the total there. Texas does go beyond the minimum for pregnant women. This was passed a couple of sessions ago in the state legislature. Covers pregnant women up to 198 of the FPL. State law expanded coverage to 12 months after baby is born, right? So pregnant women, right, they get Medicaid, and once the baby is born, um, they get they get Medicaid coverage for the whole for the first year. Uh, Important because Medicaid paid 45% of all Texas births and 40% of all births in the United States in 2025. Having a baby here in the state is very, very expensive, very expensive. But Medicaid is paying for that, so it does help people. Texas also goes above the federally mandated income threshold for long-term care, as well for the elderly. All right. It now covers almost 4 million Texans. That's around 12% of Texans are covered under Medicaid. In Texas, 55% of Medicaid clients are Hispanic, 20 are white Anglo, 17 are African American. 97% of Texan individuals receive managed care, right? State pays private health insurance companies to manage Medicaid benefits, easier for state budgeting, potentially stops fraud or overuse, encourages preventive measure. So, what we mean by managed care is that there are these uh, third parties who are in charge of enrolling people into Medicaid, right? And these businesses are the ones that are communicating with the patient with their clients and saying, hey, it's time for you to go check up on it's time for you to go get some blood work done. It's time for you to get your annual physical and stuff like that, right? And it's easier for the state to budget, right? Because right, it's these companies who are getting billed for who are the ones that are managing Medicaid, right? It's not the state legislature, right? And then it stops fraud and overuse because when a patient goes to their doctor or goes to the emergency room and they see that they're covered by these managed care companies, they can say, "Hey, you've been here, right? You've been here quite a few times. Are you okay?" And stuff of that nature. Then you have CHIP, Texas Children Health Insurance Program, CHIP. It was founded in 1977. It's a state federal healthcare program for children of low-income families who nevertheless make too much to qualify for Medicaid, right? So in other words, right, they're poor, but because their families make more money, they're not eligible for Medicaid. So the federal government passed this insurance program for children, right? Uh, More money from the federal government to the states. States can either include CHIP within their medical program or create a separate CHIP plan. Uh, um, Texas operates chips separately, right? States set eligibility limits. Texas covered children and only children up to 206 of the FPL. Unlike with Medicaid, there is an enrollment fee and copay, but very low, right? The copay is usually like $1 or $2. It covers very few people compared to Medicaid, and you see the number there of how many children are under this program, the CHIP program. Now we get to the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, the medical expansion part. So in 2010, right, the Obama administration was able to pass the Affordable Care Act. Okay. The Obama administration hoped that the ACA would lead to healthcare coverage for almost all citizens through the following mechanisms. First, right, employers with 50 or more full-time equivalent workers had to provide health insurance to an employee or pay a fine. Secondly, there was the establishment of a healthcare insurance exchanges for individuals not covered by their employers, Medicaid or Medicare. Right? And thirdly, and most importantly, there would be the expansion of Medicaid to all individuals below 138% of the federal poverty level. Okay, so that was part of the ACA, how they wanted to make sure that everyone was going to get health care. How was the Obama administration going to get the states to go along with this? Federal government to pay 100% of the cost of new enrollees for the first 3 years, and after it would gradually decline to 90. So this is a big incentive. So here you have the federal government saying, hey, states, if you participate here in this new program, right, for the first 3 years, any person that that you enroll in Medicaid, we are going to pay for their services 100%. And then after 3 years, we're only gonna pay 90%, and the states are gonna be responsible for paying the 10%, right? Huge incentive, right? Now, so that's what we call the carrot. The stick, the original law would punish states if they did not agree to the expansion of Medicaid by depriving them of all their existing Medicaid benefits. So the stick would be if you do not participate in this program, then you are going to lose your Medicaid benefits. The federal government will no longer be responsible for providing the matching funds. Okay. Some of the states sued, they went to the Supreme Court. The federal Supreme Court said that no, you cannot, that the federal government cannot do this. It hurts federalism. So the expansion therefore became entirely optional for the states. There was no stick, right? The federal government cannot withheld Medicaid benefits. That's what the Supreme Court said. So this, in a sense, ruined the Affordable Care Act. Okay, but nonetheless, most states expanded Medicaid because they wanted that federal government. And up to now, 10 states, including Texas, have not expanded Medicaid. We're one of the few holdouts. These are the states where Medicaid expansion has been implemented, and then you see the 10 states. You can see mostly in the South, with the exception of Wyoming, Kansas, and Wisconsin. But you see, the big one is Texas. We have not expanded Medicaid. Okay. So now, right, Texas now accounts for about 30% of potential Medicaid expansion beneficiaries in the US, people that are in the so-called coverage gap. There are people too poor to qualify for subsidized private coverage on the healthcare.gov, the marketplace that the ACA created, where people can go to this website and shop around for healthcare, but too rich or childless to obtain coverage through Medicaid, right? And now with the rising cost of healthcare, right? Even going to the healthcare website and shopping for healthcare, right, is becoming problematic because the premiums are very expensive. So people are there's a right a lot of Americans have no healthcare coverage. Okay. All right. So class, the readings for this week. Right. So in the textbook, read chapter 13, public policy, education policy, right? Just these 5 pages, pages 420 through 425. So you guys can know a little bit more about education policy. And then Medicaid, pages 431 and 438. Okay. So for this week, we have 6 readings. The first 3 are going to help you for your classroom discussion. So reading number 1. Governor Greg Abbott signs 8.5 billion public education funding plan into law. Here's how it works. So for this article, focus on how the 8.5 billion will be used, teacher pay and staffing issues, the limits of the funding bill. For reading 2, school choice, vouchers, and the future of Texas education, what school vouchers are and how they work in Texas, the argument for and against vouchers, the political battle behind vouchers in Texas. Reading number 3, Texas schools say that they still face budget difficulties despite the 8.5 billion boost. Why schools are still struggling after receiving more state funding, the limits of the basic allotment increase, and how enrollment, vouchers, and special education affect school finances. And then the next 3 readings are going to help you for your essay number 3. Why Texas Republicans still oppose Medicaid expansion. So for this article, right, concentrate on why Texas has not expanded Medicaid, the impact on uninsured Texans, the argument for and against Medicaid expansion. Reading number 5, Medicaid expansion impact in Texas. So here focus on Texas uninsured population and the coverage gap, Texas financial argument for Medicaid expansion, and how Medicaid expansion could affect the state and local communities. And then for the last reading, why states should not expand Medicaid, the argument that Medicaid expansion could hurt current Medicaid recipients, the financial concerns about expansion, the difference between health insurance coverage and actual access to care. So focus on those three things for the last reading. All right, so online discussion board prompt number 5. So this is your prompt. Texas has recently made major changes to education policy, including a new public school funding bill and the creation of education savings accounts, often called school vouchers. Supporters argue that these policies give families more choices and provide needed money for teacher pay, special education, school safety, and early learning. Critics argue that the public schools are still underfunded and and that vouchers may take students and funding away from districts already facing budget deficits, declining enrollment, inflation, and teacher shortage. After going through the course material, answer the following question. Should Texas focus more on increasing funding for public schools, expanding school choice through vouchers, or trying to balance both approaches? Explain your position. So, in your response, be sure to explain your reasoning clearly and support your ideas with examples from the course material. Your initial post is due by the end of the day Thursday and must be a minimum of 350 words. You are also required to submit at least 2 replies to your classmates by the end of the day on Sunday. Each reply must be a minimum of 250 words. Okay. And this is the rubric for the online discussion question and essay number 3. Okay. Texas is one of the largest states that has not expanded Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act. Supporters argue that expansion would provide healthcare insurance to more low-income Texans, bringing billions of federal dollars into the state, reduce uncompensated care costs, and help rural hospitals. Opponents argue that Medicaid expansion would increase government spending, weaken the original purpose of Medicaid, crowd out private insurance, and create long-term budget risk for Texans. For this essay, answer the following question. Should Texas expand Medicaid? Why or why not? Okay, so that's your prompt. You have to explain, right? Do you think Texas should expand Medicaid? If you say yes, tell me why. If you say no, tell me why not. Okay. Do not simply summarize the readings. Your response should take a clear position. You may argue that Texas should expand Medicaid, should not expand Medicaid, or create a modified Texas style version of, of expansion. Whatever position you take, you must support your argument with evidence from the readings. Your essay must be a minimum of 1,000 words, double space, Times New Roman, 12-point and 1-inch margins. It should include a clear introduction with a thesis statement, evidence from the assigned readings, MLA format, and a bibliography, proper grammar, complete sentences, and organized paragraphs, right? So remember, in your argument, right, make sure that whatever position you take, you support it with evidence from the readings, right, or evidence from any outside source, right? But make sure that you cite it properly, okay? And this is the rubric for the essay. That is it for this week. If you have any questions uh, or concerns, please feel free to email me. I'll see you next week.